Welcome in episode 22 of the Educational Duct Tape Podcast. In today's episode, I'll be joined by Dr. Alec Couros to talk about digital footprints, digital portfolios, lateral reading, student fact checkers, becoming a digital skeptic, Knowbe4, and more. Plus, an opportunity for your voice to be featured on next week's episode.
I'm Dr. Sam Fessich, host of the EduMagic podcast, a proud member of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to right now. The opinions are those of each individual host. You can find more great education podcasts by visiting our website, edupodcastnetwork.com. Get ready because the learning begins in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to the Educational Duct Tape Podcast with Jake Miller.
Welcome in, duct tapers, and welcome to any new friends out there. I'm so glad that you're all here today. My name is Jake, and I am here to talk to you about duct tape and educational technology and how I see this weird metaphor as an EdTech decision-making protocol that teachers can put to work in their classrooms today. Or maybe not today. For many of you, it may even be summer break as you listen to this. So, you know, you can put it to work whenever you're next at school. And if it is your summer break, congratulations. I hope you're already enjoying it. It's not mine yet, but it's coming around the corner. Getting exciting. I'm so excited. Speaking of exciting, I'm so excited to have Dr. Alec Couros in for an interview today. I've followed him on social media for quite some time. The topics that we discuss are a bit different from what we normally discuss on the show, but I know they're on the minds of most educators, and we still stick to the educational duct tape format and talk about how and what teachers can do in their classrooms to support students in these, digital lives that they now have. So I do think that you'll enjoy it. And he has some refreshing views on digital footprints and students' online lives that I think you'll be glad that you heard. They're a little different from what we tend to hear. And so I think they're really refreshing to hear. For those of you listening for the first time today, a little overview of how the show works. Each episode follows a similar format. First, a little intro, then my soapbox moment, which is like a little keynote from me. Then I'll welcome in the episode's guest. And my guest and I play one of a few games, then address 2 educational questions and how we could use educational technology to answer, solve, or address them. And then at the end of the show, I share stuff that our wonderful community of duct tapers have shared on Twitter, Apple Podcast reviews, or the special Flipgrid for the show. And you newbies, I hope you'll stick around as duct tapers too and start to share on those venues as well. Speaking of sharing on those venues, we're doing a special thing for episode 23 next week, which I am sorry to announce is the season finale of Educational Duct Tape. Yes, I am taking the summer off, as you are too. I hope that if you haven't listened to all the shows, you'll spend some time over the summer going back and listening to them. And if you have listened to all the shows, maybe you'll spend some time listening to some of the other wonderful educational podcasts that are out there, or some of the wonderful educational books that are out there, or who knows, maybe you'll just take a break and relax. That is fine too, whatever you choose. But I will be taking some time away from the podcast. But episode 23, as I was starting to say there, is the season finale. And I do believe that one of the most important things we could do as educators that we often forget at the end of our school year is to reflect on 2 different things: the things that we've accomplished and the things that made us smile, and the things that we enjoyed and the things that made us laugh. So we're going to do both of those things next week in episode 23, but I need your help on the things that we accomplished. 1. So in the show notes, you'll find a link to a special grid over on Flipgrid where I am looking for what things you accomplished in your classroom this year as a result of hearing about them on the podcast. So it may have been from me, it may have been from a guest, it may have been from something somebody else submitted via the Flipgrid, but something that you thought of or heard of on the podcast and then put in action in your classroom and had some success with it. The grid is called Success Stories, and it is on that Flipgrid for the Educational Duct Tape Podcast, which you can find in the show notes, or go to eduducttape.com and click on the Flipgrid link, or go to flipgrid.com/eduducttape. Any of those 3 ways will work. Just get there and share some of your successes, and you will most likely be featured on next week's podcast sharing about them, because we want to reflect on the wonderful things that we as a community of duct tapers have accomplished. School's out for summer. School's out for ever. I'm not a very good singer, guys. But how will I be spending my summer? Well, the number one priority for me is family. So there will be plenty of baseball games, soccer games, trips to the swimming pool, hikes, bike rides, day trips, and a vacation, but there will also be a lot of EdTech stuff too. Along with launching the second iteration of GIF a Day and staying active online, I'll be all over the place speaking. I'll be at the Keep Academy in Streetsboro, Ohio on June 11th, the LEAD Conference in Strongsville, Ohio on June 18th, and for my first time at ISTE on June 22nd and 24th. I'll obviously be there on the 23rd and 25th too. I just won't be presenting on those days. If you're going to be there at ISTE, be sure to say hello, but also be sure to attend the Education Podcast Network Meetup on Sunday the 23rd. That is one place where you could for sure bump into me and we could chat about the podcast and all the wonderful podcasts on that wonderful network that I get to be a part of. I will also be at Springfield Township Schools in New Jersey on July 25th, and I'll be virtually presenting at the hashtag KY Go Digital Central event. That's a Kentucky event on July 30th. I'll be at the Sci-Fair ISD Digital Learning Day in Texas on July 30th and 31st. In the fall, I'll be at a bunch of different places, including a few local schools, at the Quincy Conference in Illinois, the TCCA Conference in Texas, and the Ideastream Technology and Learning Conference in Cleveland. Links to information for all of those events are in the show notes. You can also hear me talk about educational duct tape in the online Teach with Tech conference on July 23rd and the Homeschooling Teens Global Summit coming up this June. I'm hoping to add some more locations to that list, so visit jakemiller.net/speaking if you'd like to help me out with that. Oh, sorry. Hold on. Let me just grab my soapbox from over here. Yeah. There we go. That's perfect. Climb up on there. We don't have time to rush. So I thought about this quote a couple days ago. It came up twice last week. One, I was grilling dinner for the family one evening last week, and I had taken the meat off of the grill and brought it inside, and I realized that one of the pieces of chicken was not that well done, and I wanted to put it back on for a few minutes. So I rushed back over to the grill, holding it between the two tongs, and I went to open the grill up as quickly as possible and pop the chicken in there because we had a baseball game to get to that night, and my other son had soccer practice, and we had a billion places to get to. I needed to get dinner on the table quickly, so I rushed to put the chicken on the grill, and I touched my hand directly on the grill in this process, and I still have a nice line on my hand where I burnt myself, and I said, ugh, Jake, if you had just moved slowly and deliberately and did it the correct way instead of trying to rush, you wouldn't now be running your hand under cold water, and the chicken would be on the table, and we'd all be happily eating. And then the next day, I was looking at Facebook at my memories, and I saw a post from, 4 or 5 years ago when I, when I weed whacked my ankle. I literally was standing in my yard after finishing the lawn mowing with the weed whacker, and I was in the middle of going around and weed whacking along our fence, and I had to stop. I don't remember what I had to do, but I didn't want to take the time to turn off the weed whacker, and I accidentally hit myself in the leg with the weed whacker. And I said I looked like I had gotten in a fight with a 6-inch tall ninja because I had all these slices on my leg from literally weed whacking my own ankle. When had I just taken the time to stop what I was doing and set down the weed whacker, it never would have happened, and I wouldn't have had to then go inside and bandage myself up before I could finish the weed whacking. I ended up using more time because of this silly thing that I was trying to do while I was rushing. So the quote I said at the beginning there, we don't have time to rush. I'm paraphrasing, and I'm not sure if that's exactly how it goes because I don't have the book in front of me. But it comes from a book that I read a few years ago called The Achievement Habit. Stop wishing, start doing, and take command of your life. And it's written by Bernard Roth. It was a very good book. But in this particular excerpt, he says, we don't have time to rush. And this is exactly what he's saying. He says, when you rush through things, you don't do them well enough, and you make mistakes and have accidents in the process that require you to then go back and redo things and fix things, and you actually end up spending more time in the long run because of the rushing you did. So if you just did things carefully and the best way possible, you would actually get them done faster than by rushing, because of the things you have to go back and fix. So how does this relate to the classroom? I'm not just warning you so that you don't weed whack your ankle or burn your hand this summer. I'm telling you because I do think it relates to your classroom. Think about it. You could breeze through a learning standard in one day of direct instruction rather than spending 3 days having the students write scripts for and film green screen videos about that same tech standard. And think about it. Get it done in 1 day, get it done in 3 days. But in that one day of direct instruction, do all of your students understand it at the end? Do they retain that knowledge the next day when they walk back into your room? Does it truly stay with them? And if it doesn't, do you end up going back and reteaching it before the big state standardized test? And does the teacher the following year go back and reteach it? And does a tutor that maybe the school provides or the family pays for end up reteaching it too? And does the student end up spending countless hours in the evening going back over these things with their parents to brush up on these facts? And when you really think about it, maybe spending those 3 days doing it really well, doing something really empowering and engaging with your students may actually lead to more efficient learning than rushing through it in one day. I really believe this to be true. I believe that you could do things slower but better and end up in a better place in the end than rushing through them. This is an important thing, I think, for educators to hear at this point in the year, because some of you might be thinking, oh man, I didn't get through everything. But really, it's about the amount that the kids learned, not the amount that you taught. So regardless of whether you taught everything that you were supposed to, if they learned everything that you taught them, that's a huge win. And that's great. So think about it. The next time you want to lop a day off an activity because it just takes too long, we don't have time to rush, because you end up paying for it in the long run. You might end up going back and reteaching it, or somebody else might be going back and reteaching it. So do things the way that you know is best. What's best for your students as learners? No, I'm not saying to turn everything into a 15-day project. I'm saying what gives you the best value. And I think that sometimes taking 2 or 3 days doing something really well instead of one day doing it poorly gives you the value. Now, I don't want you to take that 3 days and expand it into 14 days if that doesn't really add that much more value. But really, we don't have time to rush. Do it the most efficient and effective way that benefits your students.
Today's guest.
Today, our guest is Dr. Alec Couros. Dr. Couros is a professor of educational technology and media at the Faculty of Education at University of Virginia. He has given hundreds of workshops and presentations nationally and internationally on topics such as openness in education, networked learning, social media and education, digital citizenship, and critical media literacy. His graduate and undergraduate courses help current and future educators understand how to use and take advantage of the educational potential offered by the tools of connectivity. Dr. Couros, welcome in.
Hi, welcome.
Yeah, I hope you don't mind. From here on forth, you will be Alec during this episode. Is that okay?
Not a problem at all. That's great.
For those people who are regular listeners, they know that I am not a formal guy, so I'm not going with
Alec
the formal names.
Yeah, for sure.
That's great. So I'm so glad to have you in. We had to reschedule 4 or 5 times, a couple times on my end and a couple times on your end. We should come up with some exciting excuses for the audience for what was happening. For me, there was one time that I was skydiving.
Right.
I was supposed to be home in time for the interview, but I landed in a tree and was stuck there for an hour. What was one of yours?
Cliff diving. Yeah, mostly cliff diving.
Cliff diving.
That's right. My wingsuit was dirty. I had to take it to the laundry, and they weren't on time. It was just a mess, I tell you.
Yeah, I remember that panicked email you sent me from the laundromat. That was that was a crazy one. So, Dr. Couros, I know you speak here. I'm already calling you doctor again. It's just a respect thing.
That's right.
So I know we said there you speak a lot on openness in education and digital citizenship and online safety and media literacy. Where do you tend to do these speaking events? Are they mostly for schools or for adults, or what kind of events are we talking about?
It's all sorts of things, actually. Because I teach in a teacher education faculty, I get to work a lot with teachers, whether they're going to become teachers or whether they've been teachers practicing for some time now. So I get to speak with a lot of K-12 systems. Typically, when I speak with a K-12 system, like a school, for instance, I would speak to the kids. I'd try to get a chance to speak to as many kids as possible with formal or informal presentations. I get a chance to speak to parents, usually in an evening session, and certainly teachers. So, the idea is to guide everyone on the same message, especially when it comes to things like digital citizenship or digital literacy, because there needs to be that same message. There needs to be support from everyone. Kids are in the care of parents a big part of that time. Devices, go in between classrooms to schools and to bedrooms. And so when we're talking about these things, whether it's safety related or lower literacy or what's happening in school, it's really important that we talk to all stakeholders. But at the same time, I also get to teach at or to speak at higher ed conferences, usually around educational technology and media changes in society and so on. So I do the really great and engaging faculty conferences, but also the very dry academic ones as well.
Yeah, the dry academic ones. I hope none of those people are listening.
That's right. Probably not.
Right. One thing that I like about what you're saying there is it tends to be that schools hire to talk about digital citizenship people that are police officers or safety officers or speakers that use scare tactics to talk about this stuff. And there certainly is stuff in our digital world to be frightened of and to be aware of and things like that. But you're coming at it from the point of view of an educator, of a parent, and of a person who cares about the kids and wants to see, good things happen for them. So you don't want to shelter them from the technology. You just want to kind of put in place those guardrails that allow them to move forward.
Yeah, and I think the safety workers, police, and so on. They come with it with good intentions, but a very different lens. So they get the chance to see some of the most negative aspects of. They're the ones on the other end of complaints and death threats and the sexting that happens in schools, stuff that we can't even talk about or see in some cases. So they see things that are quite a bit different. On the other side, they're not exposed to some of the great things that are happening, or at least not exposed to in the same way as some of the great things that our kids are doing out there, or they don't emphasize it. So and some of them do take a more balanced approach, and some but in some cases. I'm doing the cleanup on some of those messages where parents have been spooked and scared, and they're worried about using any sorts of technology with their children, which goes against a lot of classrooms and so on. So, making sure the message is balanced is really important, and understanding that there are, as you say, really, some negative things out there and some dangers, but they're not the same. They're not the dangers that are often overblown as you see in the media or from school speakers who are focused on that dangerous element.
Right. Well, I'm glad we have you on then to talk about and share about how we can help kids be safe and understand the risks while also being productive digital citizens and learners, digital learners, which is such a powerful opportunity they have. So I'm really glad we get to share your perspective with the educational duct tape listeners about that. But before we talk about that serious stuff, let's be a little bit silly and have a little bit of fun. Are you up for it?
Sure. Sounds good.
Sure. Okay, so we're going to start off with a game that I call Which of the Following is Less Torturous. There's actually a real game out there with a real name, but it's trademarked, so I can't say it. So I call it Which of the Following is Less Torturous.
Which of these things do you consider to be less torturous?
So here we go. Which of the following would be less torturous? Having to begin every sentence with, "Hey, idiot!" or end every sentence with, "Haha, I was just kidding." I'd imagine that in the phrasing of this podcast. If you were right now starting your sentence off to me with, "Hey, idiot," or ending it with, "Haha, I was just kidding."
I can imagine. I mean, on Facebook, I'm giving condolences and birthday wishes to people every day. So, that would be really hard to say, "Haha, just kidding," at the end of it. So I think I'm going to go with "Hey, idiot" at the beginning, because whatever happens after that, you could be a lot nicer, I guess. And you could still say kidding about the idiot thing. I don't know. I feel like there's a loophole there somehow, but I don't want to end on, condolences for your loss. Haha, just kidding. I don't know.
I think I'm with you. I'm going to start with "Hey, idiot."
Right.
Or maybe you need to combine these two things, right? "Hey, idiot." Haha, just kidding. Happy birthday.
That might work.
Right. All right. Let's get a little more educational technology on this next one. Which of the following would be less torturous? Doing all of your communication with everyone via Snapchat. And I'm currently trying Snapchat. Snapchat is just so difficult for me. Or doing all of your communication in person. So either no digital communication or all of your digital communication done via Snapchat?
Wow, that's a tough one.
Right.
I guess who am I speaking? I teach online classes.
It's everybody.
That's my bread and butter, right? Like
Right.
sure, of course, I want to communicate with my kids. I don't know what I'm going to do here, so I'm assuming I can still come home to my kids. I think
you can still do all of your in-person
I can still do that. But if it was like work communication, I think I'd go with Snapchat, just because I could, reasonably teach a course over Snapchat if I needed to. It would be a bit difficult, but you could make it happen. You could make it happen.
It'd be a nice dare for somebody to go out there and try doing.
Yeah, and if anyone's listening and they've checked out, I've got a recent one where I'm using the Snapchat gender change filter, which is kind of interesting. It's I do a little bit of a Grease Lightning song on that one, so it's
nice.
I do my own duet. So take a look.
Yeah, it's certainly a fun toy to go do the filters and things like that.
It's a lot of fun for sure.
I had to ask. So I started a Snapchat recently. I've been on Twitter for years, sharing educationally. And I was like, well, I want to try to tap into these other groups. So I wanted to start Instagram. And I was like, well, what the hey? At the same time, I'll just do Snapchat. And so I tried Snapchat, and I had to actually talk to two teacher friends who are younger and hipper than me and say, like, can you explain what I do? How do I do this? What's the story?
Well, yeah, the story thing, it's a bit out there, but the filters, most people can figure those out. I just don't know about the story. I feel a bit too self-important when I'm using the story feature to people. Right. I guess that's the same with Twitter and other tools, but I guess it just takes it a bit further that you're not just interested in this one thought I had, but you're interested in my entire day and a series of things that were happening. But I have seen this, we're going to get into this topic later. Or these topics, but good teachers use that story tool in such amazing ways, with their students. So there's always some really cool things when it comes to, whatever the new technology is, and some really dedicated and innovative teachers that say, we can make this work, we can make this relevant to our students.
Yeah. And, there's so much to say for understanding your students' world, and being able to use those things that they love as hooks. So it is worth understanding Snapchat and leveraging the things like the stories in class. I know Dave Burgess's book, Teach Like a Pirate, he talks about those things, understanding their interests. Those are huge hooks to build that rapport with the kids.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So now that we've already kind of dipped our toes into the educational technology, let's really get into it and do the educational duct tape thing. So for those people out there that might be new listeners, educational duct tape is my goofy metaphor that educational technology is at its best when it's not the goal or focus of a lesson, but it is a tool being used to solve a problem or meet a need or address a learning standard in the classroom rather than being the actual focus. So much like duct tape, using it is never your focus, but using it as a tool to meet some other need, it can be very powerful. Educational technology, I feel, is the same. So we're going to think about how educational technology can help us with some of these things. Sound good?
Yeah.
Okay, so our first question is kind of about educational technology and talks about using educational technology. So it's a little bit twofold here. So I want to know, in regards to students using technology, especially as consumers, how can we help students develop a skeptic's mindset? I tend to see the students that I work with at school just taking these things they see online for granted. Or my son, actually, is a perfect example, came to me a couple days ago. He was playing a game on the iPad, and our kids have to ask us, can I download this game? And then we screen them and we look at them on Common Sense Media and we look at the reviews and we look at all these different things before we approve it. And even still, he was on this game and a message popped up that said he had won a $100 Apple gift card, and which obviously was not true. And he said, Dad, how would I get this gift card? And so I'd have this talk with him, like, do you really think that you're getting this gift card? So how can we, aside from just that conversation, how can we build that skeptic's mindset in kids?
When I think about this problem, it's interesting because it starts at, what is the actual problem? Why do we even need that skeptic's mindset? And what you just said as an example is one of these everyday examples that I see in kids, but I also see it in adults. I saw it with some really, very intelligent friends, colleagues where I work. Basically, they got an email. There's a spear phishing scam where one of my colleagues got an email that basically said, "Hey," pretended that they were, one of our bosses, one of our deans, and basically said, "Hey, I need a couple of iTunes cards really quickly. Can you go get those for me? Because I need it. I'm in a meeting right now. I can't talk. And it was a fake email address. And this person got a PhD, who just got caught up in the moment and ends up buying like $500 worth of iTunes. Went to take a picture of them and to send it to the fake sender, the initiator of the message, and just realized at that moment, like, wait a minute, I got to step back here a second, and like this is odd. Like, why would he need $500 worth of iTunes cards? But it was that that listening to authority from the very, very beginning that he just got caught up in that moment. It was just like, I'm helping out a colleague or a boss in this case. And it just made sense. And, for some reason there was just not a second to stop. And that's a problem these days where we're constantly bombarded with information that we just don't have the time to filter things very quickly. And in fact, this has been going on a long time. Marshall McLuhan said years ago, one of the effects of living with electric information is that we live habitually in a state of information overload. There's always more than you can cope with. And this was like the 1960s that this came out of. But now we've got so much information constantly that that is bombarding us, that tech companies came up with this idea. Like, we can help them with this. We'll create algorithms. So they created, essentially what are called filter bubbles to filter out some of the bad information and give us only the things that are most relevant to us. And that caused even more problem because we're only being exposed to like half the information out there. So it causes more problems, and filter bubbles leads to more problems, and that enhances our psychological problems, things like confirmation bias, which even are amplified when it comes to getting only the information that serves your own interest. So that's a bit of the framing of the question, and then let alone fake news and intentional stuff that comes from that. Like, the problem is we just have so much information, and the tools that are supposed to be helping us are actually making it worse.
Right. So how do we? So now that we know, like, this is why we should care. This is where this problem came from, and this is why we need to help our students with it and help also with it too. But how can we help students of any age, not necessarily like my young kids, but whenever we get to those kids at any age, how can we help them start to develop that mindset that is skeptical of these things, that helps them think about things more critically and decide, should I or shouldn't I? Should I trust this? Should I not trust this? How do we help them with that?
So I think it starts with bringing in some real world examples. And we're not talking about real world examples that are necessarily historical, going back in time, getting kids at things that are outside of kids' interests. On an everyday basis, we're bombarded with, whether they're memes or like YouTube videos that are quite interesting, that allow that would be good examples to bring into the classroom, that allow students to look at, to analyze without a lot of background information, and they can figure out that there's something a bit fishy here. I think Hemingway talked about this idea of building in this sort of this crap detector that you might have that's working in you full time, 24/7, constantly looking at the world in more of a skeptical way. So, for instance, there's a kind of a hacker video. I'll try to figure out the exact name of it. But it's basically one of these videos, like sort of DIY hacks where you can, try a little project. And for the most part, when you go onto the site, it's like, little videos that if you tried, that they would actually lead to success. And, it saves, it gives you one of these life hacks. One of them was, that I saw a while back, was basically, was titled something like, charge an iPod using electrolytes in an onion. So basically, they took an onion and they soaked it in Gatorade on this video on YouTube. Soaked it in Gatorade, and that supposedly charged up the electrolytes. And from that point, they went in and basically plugged in an iPod charger or an iPod cable to it, plugged in your iPod. And it looks like, if you watch the video, it actually looks like this onion is acting as a battery.
Right.
But if you look at it, I mean, this video, it's actually on Household Hacker. All the other videos on the site are pretty good. When it comes to this one video, it just doesn't seem to be right. And if you actually tried this, it wouldn't work at all. Now, one of the things that you could try is, just see if this actually works. And That's one method of looking at it. You can look at the comments, but in this case, all the comments are like, "Hey, this saved me $45." It's like they're all trolling comments, right?
Right.
So it's not good to look at the comments because they're all in on the joke as well. So this absolutely doesn't work. And for the most part, you think it's going to work, but if you try it, it's going to gunk up your cables up a little bit with some onion guts and that sort of thing. Right. It's not going to work, but
you're going to lose a lot of friends, right?
Right.
If your phone smells like onions.
And there's another one similar to that. Like, if your ice cream is too frozen, well, warm up your spoon in the microwave for 30 seconds. Like, and obviously putting metal in this, in the microwave is not going to be great. Right. There's all sorts of these little trolls that you see on the internet, but these are the sorts of things, although, for the most part, they're developed to troll people into making bad choices. They're a fantastic way of actually discussing, because they're kind of funny, they're amusing. They're a fantastic way to discussing, like, what's really important here. Like, who is the author of this? Who developed it? How do you know this to be true? Is there anything here that seems a bit fishy by what you know about the natural world? And so there's lots of things there that you can actually talk to. And talking about these things, these everyday examples that people come by, I think are really important. And for kids to understand that they're bombarded with these things on a daily basis. And then moving it into things like news and bias and authorship and those sort of things are really important. And you can do some of those more traditional things, but this is a really good start to get some of those conversations started. And there's certainly more that you can do as well.
Yeah, that's such a great point to bring in those real world examples and think about, like, have them pause and think about, first of all, do you believe that an onion and Gatorade will charge your phone?
Right.
And that's the talk I had with my son when he got that notification that he had won an Apple gift card. I said, do you believe that just by going on this website, they're going to give you $100? Does that seem believable?
Right.
And we were talking about if it's too good to be true, there's a very good chance it's not true, and you need to go on to the next step. And so you're right on the next step there. Now you need to think about, who is this person that's telling me this, and what do they stand to gain by telling me this, right?
Yeah. And that's actually one of the concepts in this sort of new term that you're starting to hear in sort of information literacy. It's around lateral reading. And lateral reading, so for instance, they did a bit of a study on, so PhD historians they took. They took some undergraduate students, and they took professional fact checkers. So they took these three groups, and they wanted to kind of analyze how they actually looked at information. And the historians spent a lot of time with these sources, analyzing for the content itself. So looking through the content, trying to make sense of it. But and the same thing happened with undergrads. But what you found was ultimately fact checkers did things very different. They spent most of their time off page trying to verify the source of this information. Like, who is this? Who is the source?
Right.
What are they all about? And that's an incredibly important piece, and that's what this lateral reading thing really is. It's thinking more about the sources and spending more time on the source versus actually the content itself. And it's sort of like, if you have a trusting relationship with someone, you tend to believe things over time that they might be saying. But if you don't have that sense of trust, or that they're biased, or that they have, that they have motivations for what they might be saying, then you need to be more skeptical about the things that they say. So the content in itself is difficult to ascertain, the validity. But when you start thinking about the messenger, I think that becomes, it's not the only thing to consider, but certainly it's part of this tool set.
Right. And that's where that, well, not exactly there, but generally you think, well, I don't need to read laterally unless I have some reason to doubt what they're saying. But that's where you mentioned earlier, confirmation bias comes in. Right. If it's meeting the biases that you already hold, if it's confirming those, then you have no reason to read literally. But we need to teach our students to start reading literally. Unless you know that's a trustworthy source, don't just assume that it's honest because it meets your expectations. Like, it's one thing to say, yeah, I'm going to read laterally when I hear that I could charge my iPhone with an onion. It's another thing to say when I hear something that meets my political values or my, my beliefs about science or whatever, that I'm not going to read laterally because it's confirming my biases. But we really do need to teach kids how to do that and to do it more often.
Yep. And I think part of it is the understanding of, like, so for instance, this one video on this household hacker, every other video seems to be valid. Like, it's not actually a site known to have a lot of invalid hacks. Like for the most part, it's all good stuff. But to shake up your readership once in a while, throw a video in like that, and it gets people, whether it's an April Fool's thing or whether it's just just remember, wake up, just make sure that you're always alert to these things. Just because I said something 99% of the time doesn't mean that I'm always right. And so I think that's really important, and shaking that up for students is really an important piece in all of this. So thinking of another blog post that I remember that sort of inspired me to do similar things in my own class. There was one called, if you look for it, probably under Zen Moments, it's My Favorite Liar. And it was basically recalling, there was the author of this blog post recalled how his professor was his favorite professor and that he had at university. And that he had this really interesting strategy that basically at the beginning of the semester, he'd say, between today until class right before the finals, it is my intention to work into every one of my lectures a single lie. And your job is to, amongst the other things that you do as students, try to catch me in the lie of the day. So it's this idea that, you throw something in there, and students seem to, in this particular example, they actually, they did more work to the content that they were receiving. They just didn't passively receive, take notes, and accept everything as it was going to be. They said, they were looking for this thing, and they seemed to be more engaged in it. And just to top off that story, it was interesting. At the end of the post, at the end of the semester, no one could figure out what the lie was in the last lecture. And the professor says, "Do you remember that first lecture?" Well, when I said every lecture had a lie, well, that was a lie as well. So,
oh gosh,
it was kind of cool how he turned it out on them. But it's this idea is making sure that you're implanting enough opportunity to actually to allow students to question the credibility of any content or resource.
Wow, and that's powerful for a couple of reasons. Number one, just from a curriculum and pedagogy kind of point of view, like you're saying, the kids are going to think, or the students of whatever age are going to think more deeply about the content because they're trying to find you in that lie.
Right.
So not even just thinking about them being good lateral readers or good skeptics. They're literally just learning more because they're doing that.
Yeah. But
the other part is that you're a person, this teacher is a person that the students trust inherently. And you're saying, I am going to lie to you. So it's building in that idea that even people you trust, either intentionally or unintentionally, are telling you false things at times.
Absolutely. And that actually gets into a whole other area. One of the things that people look me up online, they'll notice that I've been involved as sort of a victim, I guess, in catfishing schemes for the last 12 years, where
I've heard a podcast where you talked about that.
Yeah, people have taken my photos and they use, scammers have used my photos in a number of romance profiles. Mm-hmm. So I'm all over the place in terms of dating scams. It's not actually me; it's just my photos. Right. But these catfishing schemes are actually what are known as they're trust schemes in the criminal code 419. If you've ever heard the number, they're actually recognized as trust schemes. So it's basically about how someone will, through their profile, their photos, conversations on the phone, typically, will gain your trust, and that trust can be leveraged to trick you. And so, again, all of this is becoming really important. Like, who do we trust? Do we blindly trust them at some point?
Right. And
how do we use a number of the tools? How do we use a mindset to ultimately being able to tell the difference between truth and fiction? And part of this, while catfishing is not like the concern for everyone,
right?
This is, again, one of these other things to discuss and talk about the idea of trust and, how we have to perhaps be less trusting of even the thing of the ones or the sources or the people that we may trust, because there's bias, there's deception, there's all sorts of things that we have to discuss. And again, if it leads to students being more engaged and more critical of the things that they're taking up in their classes, I think it's really an important conversation to be having.
Yeah, and I like the way that you're kind of saying here that you can almost not talk about this term of catfishing, but instead develop the skills that can help them, better handle those situations. So we could let those people that come to schools and talk about the scary side of digital life, talk about the term catfishing, but we can build students who are already skilled at being, like you said, skeptics, right?
Yep.
Yep. So I have two little things I want to share here to go with this of how to build this in kids. One plays off of your idea for using real world examples. And I like to, when I work with students on digital citizenship and things like this, to give the kids example websites that are trustworthy and not trustworthy. And there are multiple collections of them out there that I'll link into the show notes. But what I like to do, actually, I've done it before where I just gave them just fake websites and asked them to figure out why they were fake. But I think I actually like the idea better of giving them some fake and some not fake, sure. Saying, okay, here's 4 websites. 2 of them are fake. 2 of them are real. How can you figure out which ones are fake, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and have them develop their own rules for determining which ones not to trust. And there are tests out there, like, it's funny you mentioned Hemingway's quote. He didn't say crap detector. He said something else. We'll go with crap. Right. There's something out there called the CRAP test. It's CRAAP, and it's look at the, I forget, content relevance, accuracy. I forget what they all are, but it's how to look at a website critically and determine if it's if it should be trusted or if it's biased. And I can't remember what that acronym means. So I don't think a student would remember what the acronym is. So I think it's stronger to have them build up their skills and come up with their own, protocol for determining what a trustworthy site is and what a trustworthy site is not. The other thing I want to mention here actually is directed towards teachers. In the school district that I work at, I wasn't part of the team that put it in place or anything, but I have been very impressed with a company called Knowbe4. Have you heard about this?
No, I haven't.
No, so it's Knowbe, KNOWBBE, and then the number 4, and it's knowbe4.com. So like I said, my school district does use this, but I'm obviously not benefiting by giving them a plug here. Mm-hmm. But what they do is they create a couple different things, like some phishing tests for teachers or employees to take to determine if they're being phished, okay, or if they're susceptible to phishing scams. And then also some trainings where you go through and learn about these different things. So you were talking earlier about the person who was tricked into buying the iTunes cards. And that's actually one of the things that they go through in their trainings. And I've been very impressed by it. Unfortunately, it's for adults, not just teachers, right, but adult employees, not for kids. But it is a great way to help teachers plug into it a little bit better. And then maybe they're, more skilled at doing these things for their kids and helping them be skeptics in that way.
Awesome. Well, if you're sharing resources, I'll share a couple too.
Yeah, go for it.
So the book, it's a free book that you can get. It's Web Literacy for Student Fact Checkers. It's by Michael Caulfield, and you can add that show notes if you like. And that's a great one because it gets kids to think like the web does. And so if you think more about how the web works, it's actually a really good strategy to think more critically and more skeptically. Another, just a little tool that I think is kind of fun because there's a kind of a bookmarklet tool. If you Google edit any website, it's a free tool that basically, if you run it as a bookmarklet in Firefox or Chrome, you can bring up, say, CNN or Fox News or something, and click on the bookmarklet, and you can actually edit the page, so you can print that off or show it up on the screen or something. So you could totally change the headline, some of the copy on any site, and bring it up as a discussion for students. So it makes it, even if you screen cap that and so on, just knowing how easy it is to change, like even the content on legitimate sites and share that with others is something to know more about or to discuss with or to use an activity as well. The other thing I wanted to mention too is I use one tool called Mentimeter. You could do this on probably any polling tool, but with Mentimeter, I would bring up in a polling situation, bring up 2 different websites and have students decide, which one they think is fake and which one is, not fake or real. And then they can vote on those things, and we discuss like why they voted for the ones that they did. But they can actually look at both, and I've got lots of questions like that, which I'd be willing to share with you or listeners.
Oh, yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, I'd love to link that in the show notes. That's a great idea because that then brings up a discussion.
Yeah.
So instead of just the kid individually on their computer trying to figure out which one's fake, they're actually having the poll and seeing how they did as a class. And it might be eye-opening to see how many kids picked incorrectly. Like
little tricks. They look exactly the same, but there's a tiny change to the URL. Like they add a .co or something like that. So they look exactly like a credible news source, but the thing that you didn't notice is the URL. So things like that make a huge difference in terms of the credibility.
Yeah. I like those ideas a lot. And I like that Edit Any website. I'm going to check that out because
Yeah, it's cool.
I know, as a technologist, let's say, that I can go onto a website and open up the source code and make changes on it. But that's not something that the average technology users can do. But something like that makes it easier. What a great way to just change up a website and show it to students and, get them to think critically about what you're showing them.
For sure. Yeah. How quickly lies can spread.
Right, exactly. Okay, so I know you have another question you wanted to talk about that kind of plays off of this same kind of thing, but from a different perspective here.
So the question that I've been thinking about here is, we often talk about, some of the more negative ways or the ways that are a bit more superficial in terms of teaching cyber safety and digital citizenship. So my key question really is, how can we teach digital citizenship, if we're going to use that term, in more authentic ways? And that's one I'd like to certainly explore a bit more, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So my thought here is, it kind of plays off what we were talking about there, where we don't want to just use the scare tactics. We want to develop kids who are successfully using technology as learners. I think things like digital portfolios are wonderful for that. I also think students as creators is wonderful for that. I also like to talk to students about having, we talk so much about digital footprint and we talk about negative digital footprint, but I don't very often hear anybody talking to students about positive digital footprints. And actually, when I've talked to students about that before, there's a little bit of head scratching because it's not a term that they've heard before. And we talk about, it's interesting, if you ask a group of kids what a positive digital footprint is, I would encourage anybody to do that. They might say things like not sharing things that have nudity in them, not sharing things that have swear words in them, not posting bullying comments and things like that. And I have to tell them, no, what you're talking about by not doing that, you're talking about more of like a neutral digital footprint, which is great. We want you to have that. But I'm talking about a positive digital footprint. So helping them build up their strategies of it's hard because a positive digital footprint really means a little bit of bragging in a way, but we really want the kids to understand that now in our society now we take pride in the good things we do and we share them out. And something like sharing in class via a tool like Flipgrid or on a learning management system, sharing with your classmates, but also sharing with your community and your parents through things like digital portfolios is a really strong way to help them build that up. And I think too, if they're taking risks together as they're all being creators and sharing their things, they start to understand the power that their words have in relation to their classmates, where you don't want to speak negatively of what somebody else did. So, and at the same time, it's kind of changing the way that they are, reacting to other people's content too. But I'm guessing you have some other great ideas for this as well.
Yeah, and a lot of them really intertwine and align with what you've got to say. I think your first point really just speaks to this idea that we've been teaching digital citizenship with a very much a deficit approach, that having less out there is a positive, or just not doing something is a positive. So I do want to stress that what you said there, I think, is great. Ultimately, I think there was a time, in the 1990s when we scared kids from the internet, that it was just a place to look up stuff, and that they didn't have to be as social and they didn't have to put their footprint out there. And so we did scare kids for some time to stay off the internet. Over time, I realized, that maybe this cyber predator threat wasn't the same as we all had thought, that kids are becoming more social, MySpace and ICQ and all those things are becoming realities. And, kids were, hanging out in these places, and it was replacing malls and so on. And, really today we can't look at a kid's life and not think about the online space. So, we want kids to actively participate in their sort of their regular, face-to-face spaces. And of course, we want them to be the same way in those online spaces. And so we're really ignoring a huge part of their lives if we say we're not going to really pay attention and we don't want you to do much in these online spaces. So I really tried to, subscribe to this model of thinking about how we can thin the walls for students over time. So developmentally, and this also often has to do with the culture and the beliefs of the families associated with those kids specifically, and also as a community of, what do we believe about the appropriateness of getting, a particular age of students online. So we know, for instance, that kids at around the ages of 9 or 10 or 11, that's when they typically do their own first post, by themselves online. They've got their first social media account. And this is about 3 or 4 years before the child COPPA, which we often know as the Child Online Privacy Protection Act. The 13 years of age restriction typically tells parents and teachers, at the age of when we should actually expose to our kids to these tools. Mm-hmm. So it's happening very young. So we're talking, grades, 4, 5, 6, where we have to have a conversation, and that doesn't mean we just throw them out there. I like your mention of Flipgrid. That's a fantastic tool, for teaching young YouTubers, getting mm-hmm. kids to, have a practice space where they can actually sort of find their voice online, find how to deal with media, understand that some things can be private and some things can be public. I think that's a great space for that. Over time, as we're seeing kids when they're 13, they're on TikTok, they're on Instagram, certainly they're on Snapchat. They're making all sorts of decisions around their privacy and what things they're going to share, and having savvy teachers that talk to them about these things, that understand more about their spaces, are going to be really important. But again, it's not just this conversation. It's like, how are you doing learning in these spaces? In my own class, is a big part of what I do in classes is I prepare them for life outside of the LMS or the school system or the school web pages. As you mentioned, portfolios are important, and you could do things like Seesaw, where where you're really supporting that, but most of it's still in that space. But then you can get into like WordPress portfolios or Blogger portfolios or Google types portfolios, and that's really, getting students to be parts of these spaces. In my classes now, I teach undergraduates and graduates, but I've done this with high school students as well, is that your end result is a space that is controlled by you, that's outside of the learning environment, but it's something that's owned by you. And maybe it's a WordPress space that you ultimately buy the domain name for. But the end goal is you've had a lot of practice a lot of the way, but you've got a space that's yours. And it's when someone Googles you, it's not going to be the Facebook you or the Instagram you, the corporate you. It's going to be the space that you own. And, I think that's what the web was first envisioned to be, not just multi-million dollar or billion-dollar conglomerates that own our identities, but spaces that we connect to each other through our own spaces and through our own conditions of the way that we want to connect together.
Right. And what better way to learn how to use those tools appropriately than to use those tools, right?
Right. Yeah. And to develop your own spaces, to develop the ways that you want to connect with others. I think that's important. Like doing something like this, like a podcast. I mean, this is a choice that you've made to connect to the world outside of some of the corporate spaces that are controlled by others. And I think that's really important, that we take these things on, that we find our voices. And sometimes it's fine to be in those more corporate spaces, but it's also great to be able to have the savvy to build your own identity. But this doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes, some people find it their own way, but if we don't do this and we don't talk about this in school, it's not going to happen in most cases. But what better way to really deal with digital citizenship, to create online creators who actually are savvy enough to control their identities, to have some say over their identities, and who are doing good things, creative things online.
Right. And I feel like it's kind of our responsibility as educators to help them kind of gradually assimilate to this, because what they need to be successful in our society, especially, for our students who are 7, 8, 9 years old, in our society 10 or 15 years down the road when they're coming out of school, what they really need is the ability to be, as you said, savvy in these environments. So we really need to start kind of helping them dip their toes in the water of sharing in an appropriate way, and not the way they chat with their friends on Roblox or something like that.
Right, yeah.
A way that's actually developing them in a way that they'd want people to look back and see.
Yeah. And at the same time, saying all that, I think it's important that, students have a space to make mistakes in. My daughter has an Instagram account the world sees, and she also has like a spam account, right, where she's a bit more her as a 14-year-old girl. And we as adults have to get over the fact that, we were maybe not always making their best choices online, and they're at a huge disadvantage these days that everything is more permanent. So we have to kind of pass the hypocrite test. If we wouldn't have said something the way that they did, we can't hold their lives, kind of throw their lives away because they've done something stupid online. We have to think about a number of different tests about, whether or not this is as disgraceful or whatever it might be at the age of 14 versus the age of 40.
Right.
We have to be more thoughtful about this and give kids a little space to live and breathe and just live and just grow up, I think.
Yeah, I'm so grateful that the things I said and did between the ages of 13 and 22 are are not out there on display. But today's youth, it's not their fault that they're in a world where it is on display, right? So we've got to kind of loosen up the reins there. Do you think that the best thing we could do in the classroom is to kind of start off by doing some sharing in kind of like a walled garden scenario? So not put it out there for everybody to see, but start sharing within their classroom and then within their school and then with their parents as well. Is that the best things we could do?
That's part of it, right? But it's got to be contrived. It's got contrived to an extent. It's got to be authentic. Mm-hmm. Like when you share something as a teacher, and you choose the setting, public, private, or maybe to the school, for instance. You need to discuss why you're doing that. I think that needs to be, whether it's a Facebook setting or whether it's like some sort of school, LMS or some sort of environment. It's really important to show the thought processes of why you choose to share, and what are the implications of sharing something in that way. How a message, is this message of me taking a picture of my kids, is this something that should go to the world? Right. Is this something that should go to just my family or to the school community? Is this photo of me saying that, or this article I'm sharing, is this something that should go to the world, or is it something that I should share just to the local community? Depending on the article, I mean, that could be said in a bunch of different ways. But speaking about like the why and then the potential implications of the why, is something that we need to voice as educators and helping students make these choices, because they don't necessarily understand the why. There's a term that's in sociology called context collapse. And context collapse basically asserts the idea that when I publish something, I have a particular audience in mind. So this might be going to my mom, right?
Right.
But mom and everyone like my mom, maybe. But ultimately, it goes to your employers, your students, everybody, right? So it's context collapse. So you can no longer control the audience. And when you can't control the audience, you have to be very thoughtful about how every single person who could potentially see it can view that content. And so that's how we share. We need to share accordingly when we start thinking about that, or suffer the implications, or maybe don't care about the implications. Maybe the message itself is more important than the potential ramifications of sharing that message. So we have to be very thoughtful. And this goes back even to the content before, this skeptical, like this topic we just were talking about. The skeptical piece is like a big part of, being a skeptic online is, and this comes out in Caulfield's book, is this idea that when you feel vindicated or passionate about something you're reading, that's when you really need to fact check something. This is the most important part of fact checking something, because all of us contribute to fake news when we're not being critical about those things that just kind of floor us, whether we're mad about it or happy about it. When we share something without being critical every single time, we have to be very thoughtful about that. And again, so these two topics come together. The sharing aspect of being critical is so important in all of this, whether we share or we don't.
Right. And those conversations are really powerful. I try to have those conversations with my own children as much as I can, but you're right. We need to start having them with students, not only because it's the right thing to do, but also because they might not have somebody at home having those conversations with them too. So,
for sure,
nothing bad can come of us having those conversations. Why is it, when we take a picture of our class and share it, tell those kids, why are you taking the picture? Who are you sharing the picture with? Is it just the parents? Is it the school community? Why would you do that? And helping them understand those things. You're right. That's a great point. And that context collapse is something that I don't know currently, a normal kid is sharing with other kids. And they need to understand that when they go onto these different platforms, maybe not Snapchat, but maybe if they start to use something like Instagram or Twitter that skews a little bit older, that they are going to experience some of that context collapse. And they need to realize, well, yeah, my friends are looking at it and my peers are looking at it, but also my, adults or my uncle or my principal or my teachers or my future employers might be looking at it too. So you've got to think about the context of all the different things you do.
Absolutely.
And it's just a great thing to have kids, think, start making those choices when they have that safety net in place. Start thinking those things through in safe situations, like you're saying.
And the key word about this is thinking, right?
Right.
Like really thinking of every possible angle. Even with young kids, sharing intimate photos. I get called into schools like it seems daily these days because this happens. Mm-hmm. And it's just the idea of not thinking that this will go to someone else, to a third party. Mm-hmm. And when we know statistically, when kids share photos, they're almost always shared by the recipient. So thinking about, and it's hard for kids that age to think about long-term consequences of their actions. I mean, their part of their brain just shuts off when it's around that. But all of these are really important ramifications for this digital identity. But ultimately, if we're really rational adults, if we're those people that we scare kids that aren't going to hire you, right? Because we talk about this all the time, that if you do stupid things online, no one's going to hire you, which is bad enough that we're doing that because kids don't need any more stress than they are, and they're worried that they've blown their entire lives. Right. That they, we have to get better at forgiveness. But part of forgiveness comes like when I, and this is where the adult literacy thing comes up. If I'm hiring someone and I see, oh, look, this student said a couple of bad things when she was 14 years old. And then I happen to look at her portfolio and all of the incredible things that she's done online. Mm-hmm. I'm not thinking that's that important. Like, I'm not going to judge a child by their one tweet because they had a bad day that afternoon. Right. Yeah. Maybe this person's changed. Maybe they didn't mean that. Maybe they're pressured to do that. Maybe, maybe there's a toxic environment around them. Right. And so as employers, I don't think we should be saying, you do these bad things online, you'll never get a job. Like, well, let's not say that because there's tons of kids in that situation currently that are in your class when you say that to them. The best you can do is say, you know what, you might have made mistakes, but let's try to fix that. Let's try our best to develop positive digital footprints. So the things that you've done that are negative are drowned out by all the good things that you've done.
Yeah. Yeah. How can we tip the scales in the positive direction?
Absolutely. No rational adult can say, you're a bad person. Like, you're someone I wouldn't hire. That basically all this stuff leads to good, right?
Yep, exactly. Yeah, and if we truly believe in a growth mindset, right, then when we talk to these kids, we've got to say, like you said, all right, you've made this mistake. What are you going to do differently now to avoid that? Right. And what else are we going to do to counteract this mistake that you've made? How are you going to tip the tables in your direction?
And how do we as adults communicate this to the community that it's not okay to judge a person by a single tweet?
Yeah, that's a good kind of truth bomb for people to hear. I think that's a perfect thing for us to wrap up on, because that's great advice for both parents to hear, educators to hear, and students to hear. Is these things about being kind of realistic about the things that are out there and the risks that we take, and that we do make mistakes, and it's okay. So, and I want to thank you so much, Alec, for being here with us today. Those of you listening, I hope you will go and follow Alec on Twitter or on Instagram. It's at COUROSA, or at his website, which is COUROS.ca. And you just have so much to share about these different things, about how we can educate students in this kind of evolving world that we're in. And I really, really appreciate you being here with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Oh, so awesome having Alec on the show today. He really had a refreshing perspective on what students are doing online and how they can have a positive digital footprint, and about the risk-taking they do, and about having a realistic perspective of the things that they're doing online. Really, really refreshing to hear these things from him, and some great ideas from him as well. But now let's move on to some great stuff from the Duct Taper community. First up, 2 Apple Podcast reviews. The first one comes from SHS Tech Guy, and it's titled Something to Learn in Every Episode. And he says, this podcast does a great job validating and confirming that some of the items that we implement are top of the line, while also inviting you to take your own path and do what works for you. I learned something new and implement something from every episode with at least one teacher in our school. One of the best educational technology podcasts you will find. Thank you so much, SHS Tech Guy. I really appreciate that. Up next, we've got a review from Windy Daze, D-A-Z-E, titled Content and Entertainment. And it says, this podcast is essential listening for any educator, not just technology coaches. I have gotten so many ideas and tons of inspiration from both the host and guests. I'm always smiling as I listen, and especially get a kick out of Jake's many character voices. Thanks for the great content, and I really encourage others to tune in. Thank you for that, Windy Daze. I really appreciate these reviews you guys leave. Thank you so much for it. Again, I hope it doesn't sound immodest for me to read these on the show. I'm just so touched by them, and I want to share it and give back to these people and say thanks for sharing these things on Apple Podcasts. I really do appreciate it. Okay, next up, hashtag EDU duct tape out there on the Twitterverse. My 4 favorite tweets this week all come from dudes. Where are the ladies out there? Hashtag EDU duct tape ladies out there. I don't want to call you out or anything, but seriously. First up, we've got at Wade Technology. Adam said, at JakeMillerTech, listening to hashtag EDU duct tape, the reaction of at Sylvia Duckworth when the possibility of not having Android apps turned on for students. And he shares a gift to go with that. It was hysterical when I said, some schools that Android apps might not be turned on their Chromebook, so they can't use the one app that she recommended. And she was like appalled, like, no, they have to turn it on. And I agree, Sylvia. It's important. They should do that. Next up, at Todd YTD, which is not Toddy, he is just Todd, says, much respect for the him yim, which is how I met your mother, comment from at JakeMillerTech. Another great episode of hashtag EDU duct tape, especially for hashtag Chromebook users. Also, he says, one horse-sized duck for sure. And yes, Todd, I'm a big How I Met Your Mother fan. I'm so sad it's off the air, but not as sad as I was about that last season. It was just so bad. But I think I want to go back and rewatch some of those first seasons because they were legend. Wait for it. I hope you're not lactose intolerant. Dairy. Next up, at Mo_physics. Our friend Mike says, me laughing at EDU poop. Hashtag EDU duct tape. You'll have to go back and listen to last week's episode to know what that's all about. At Creeds_crew, another Mike says, okay, so writing words in your, or in this case, your father-in-law's yard is way more difficult than I originally thought. Please don't change the name of the podcast to anything longer than it already is. At JakeMillerTech, hashtag fail, hashtag EDU duct tape. And Mike shows a picture of hashtag EDU duct tape mowed into his father-in-law's lawn, which is just amazing, Mike. Thank you so much for doing that. I hope your father-in-law isn't too mad at you. I thought it came out great. I'll put a link to the tweet in the show notes so everybody can see it. Next up, our new hashtag EDU duct tape tweeters of the week. I'm excited to have 6 this week. That's so awesome. At Anderson EdTech, at Darren Guy I don't even know. At Darren Guy Brarian. Daring UI Brarian. I'm not sure. At D Crinus, at Edu Creative, at Edu Futurists, and at Krista Hatch. Next up, we're supposed to have the educational duct tape Flipgrid posts and submissions from this week. But you know what, guys? I am really tired, and I'm going to share a whole bunch of them in next week's episode. So I'm going to wrap it up here. Don't forget to submit your success stories from the classroom based on stuff you learned in the podcast on the Flipgrid. Do it in the next couple days, and it'll make it into next week's episode. Don't forget also to share on Apple Podcast reviews if you haven't done so yet. Other things on the Flipgrid will be wonderful, and on social media at hashtag EDU duct tape. Don't forget to tell friends and colleagues. If you'd like some stickers, head over to jakemiller.net/send-me-stickers. If you don't receive my newsletter, which I haven't sent out recently because I've been so gosh darn busy, but if you don't sign up for it, go to jakemiller.net/newsletter and do so. Don't forget also that if you'd like to see me in your neighborhood sometime this summer or next fall, head over to jakemiller.net/speaking for some details about it. And guys, I am tired. I will see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Educational Duct Tape Podcast. Please consider rating and reviewing the show on your favorite podcast app. #EduDuctTape.